The knife slipped from Han Seo-jin's hand as Kang Tae-hyun tasted the dish, and the entire room waited for his verdict. Steam curled above the polished bowl, carrying the scent of sesame oil, roasted garlic, and something warmer that Seo-jin could never quite name. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the stainless steel counter as Tae-hyun lowered his chopsticks. He was the Korean Mafia boss everyone in Seoul spoke about only in lowered voices, yet tonight he sat alone beneath amber pendant lights, his black suit untouched by a single crease, his expression colder than the marble beneath his hands. Seo-jin swallowed and kept her eyes on the bowl. She was used to being watched in kitchens, but never like this. At 5'4" and nearly 200 pounds, she had learned early that wealthy customers noticed her body before they noticed her food. Tonight, however, Tae-hyun had requested the chef personally. "You made this?" His voice was quiet. Seo-jin nodded. "Yes, sir." He lifted the chopsticks again, took one more bite and stopped. Around them, silverware clicked against porcelain. A waiter froze beside the wine cabinet. Tae-hyun stared at the dish, as though it had opened a door he had spent years keeping locked. "What did you put in it?" he asked. "Nothing unusual." Seo-jin wiped her palm against her white apron. "Soy sauce, garlic, sesame oil, scallions. The rest is from the broth." His eyes rose to hers. "The broth. Beef bones. 12 hours. A faint crease appeared between his brows. "Who taught you?" Seo-jin hesitated. "My mother." That answer changed something, though only slightly. Tae-hyun looked back at the bowl, where the glossy sauce reflected the warm restaurant lights. For years, expensive chefs had prepared elaborate meals for him, truffles, imported seafood, rare cuts of beef, yet none had made him pause after the first bite. Seo-jin had not even intended to impress him. She had simply noticed that he had barely touched the restaurant's signature dishes and decided to make something plain, something warm. Something that did not demand anything from him. A young manager approached the table, nervous fingers smoothing his black vest. "Mr. Kang, Chef Han is new to the VIP kitchen. If there's a problem, there isn't." Tae-hyun's reply was so calm that the manager stopped immediately. Seo-jin looked up. Tae-hyun pushed the bowl toward the empty chair opposite him. "Seat." Her brows lifted. "Sir, you cooked it. Eat with me." No one moved. Seo-jin glanced at the manager, then at the bowl. Every rule in the restaurant said the chef belonged behind the kitchen doors, especially when a man like Kang Tae-hyun occupied the table. But the mafia boss was already watching her, waiting. She slowly removed her apron, placed it beside the stove, and walked toward him. For the first time that night, the frozen heart behind Tae-hyun's controlled expression seemed to hesitate. And Seo-jin had no idea that one simple bowl of soup had just become the first thing in years capable of melting it. By sunrise, Han Seo-jin had become the only chef in Seoul who could make Kang Tae-hyun change his dinner plans. At 6:15 a.m., the restaurant kitchen was already alive with the sharp clang of pans, the hiss of boiling water, and the warm smell of toasted sesame drifting beneath fluorescent lights. Seo-jin stood at the prep table in a clean white apron, her dark hair tied back, slicing green onions into thin, even ribbons. Her knife moved steadily across the wooden board. Chop, chop, chop. She paused only when a young dishwasher dropped a tray behind her. Metal rattled against the tile floor. "Leave it," she said, stepping away from her station. The teenager crouched immediately, cheeks burning as he reached for the scattered bowls. Seo-jin knelt beside him, gathering the porcelain pieces before he could cut his fingers. "You're here to learn, not to disappear every time something breaks." She placed the bowls into his hands. "And eat something before your shift." From her own lunch container, she pulled a wrapped rice roll and handed it over. He stared at it. "Chef, that's yours." "Not anymore." She returned to the stove before he could argue. Through the kitchen's narrow service window, a man in a black suit watched without saying a word. Kang Tae-hyun had arrived before opening time.
No entouraje. No announcement.
Just polished black shoes crossing the stone floor and the faint scent of cedar from his coat. He watched Seo-jin lift a heavy stockpot from the burner without asking anyone to help. Steam clouded the metal hood. Her cheeks warmed from the heat, but she kept moving, tasting broth from a silver spoon, adjusting the salt by instinct. The manager hurried toward Tae-hyun. "Mr. Kang, we weren't expecting you until dinner." Tae-hyun's eyes remained on Seo-jin. "Change that." The manager blinked. "Sir, I'll eat here tonight. Whatever she cooks." Seo-jin heard him. She turned, spoon still in her hand. "You can't order off the menu before I see what's fresh." The manager nearly dropped his tablet. Tae-hyun slowly looked at her. Most people lowered their voices around him. Seo-jin did the opposite. "Then tell me what you need," he said. She wiped her fingers on a towel and opened the refrigerator. Cold air spilled across the warm kitchen. She inspected the vegetables, checked the seafood, lifted a package of beef, then closed the door. "I need 6 hours." "For dinner?" "For your dinner." Tae-hyun's mouth tightened by the smallest degree. "And if I say no?" Seo-jin picked up her knife again. "Then you'll get whatever everyone else gets." The blade tapped against the cutting board. For a man accustomed to rooms changing when he entered them, Tae-hyun found himself standing still. He watched her work for another moment, then turned to the manager. "Cancel my meetings." The manager stared. "All of them." "All." Tae-hyun walked toward the private dining room, but stopped at the doorway.
"Tae-hyun."
Seo-jin looked up. "Yes." His voice dropped. "Make something you would cook for yourself." Then he left, while Seo-jin stood beneath the white kitchen lights, staring at the doorway. For the first time, Kang Tae-hyun had not asked for something expensive, impressive, or perfect. He had asked for something that belonged to her. Kang Tae-hyun pushed the untouched meeting files aside and sat alone at the corner table, waiting for Han Seo-jin to cook. The restaurant had not yet opened, but the private dining room already smelled of polished wood, warm broth, and freshly brewed coffee. Pale morning light slipped through the tall windows, catching the edge of Tae-hyun's silver watch as he checked the time. 6 hours had passed since he had told her to make something she would cook for herself. At precisely 6 p.m., Seo-jin entered carrying a steaming bowl with both hands. She wore the same white apron, now dusted lightly with flour, and a loose strand of hair clung to her cheek from the heat of the kitchen.
"You waited," she said.
Tae-hyun looked at the clock. "You told me 6 hours." She placed the bowl in front of him. "Then you should taste it before it gets cold." He lifted the spoon. The broth was simple, rich, and fragrant with roasted garlic. He took one sip. His hand stopped halfway back to the table. Seo-jin watched him carefully. "Too salty?" "No." "Too bland?" "No." "Then why are you staring at it?" Tae-hyun set the spoon down. "Because nobody cooks like this anymore." Seo-jin pulled out the chair opposite him, and Saturday, people still cook. They just hurry. A faint clink came from the kitchen as someone stacked plates. Tae-hyun looked at her. "You don't. Not when food matters." He took another spoonful. The warmth spread through the cold silence between them, and for several seconds neither spoke. Then Tae-hyun asked, "What does this remind you of?" Seo-jin glanced at the bowl. "Sunday mornings. With your mother?" She nodded. "She used to make soup before work. She said a person should never start a hard day on an empty stomach." Tae-hyun's fingers tightened slightly around the spoon. Seo-jin noticed, but did not ask why. Instead, she stood and reached for the bowl. "If you don't want it, I can take it back." His hand moved first, covering the rim. "Leave it." She looked down at his hand, then back at him. "You like it?" "I don't know." That's an unusual answer. Tae-hyun looked toward the window. The city lights were beginning to glow beyond the glass, reflected in the dark surface like scattered stars. "I haven't had this taste in a long time." Seo-jin lowered herself into the chair again. "Then eat."
He did.
Slowly, without his phone, without calling anyone, without once looking toward the door. When the bowl was nearly empty, Tae-hyun asked, "How much do you weigh?" Seo-jin's eyebrows rose. "That's a strange question. You're carrying 25-pound stockpots alone. And you shouldn't have to." She leaned back, the leather chair creaking beneath her. Are you offering me help, Mr. Kang? Tae-hyun reached for his coat. No, he placed a small black card beside her bowl. I'm offering you a new kitchen. Seo-jin stared at it.
Meaning?
Yours. His eyes met hers. You cook. I'll build the place. She pushed the card back across the table. I don't need saving. Tae-hyun looked at the card, then at her. Good. He picked it up. Because I'm not trying to save you. He stood, buttoned his coat, and walked toward the door. I'm trying to see what happens when someone finally gives you room to cook. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Seo-jin alone with the empty bowl and a decision she had never expected a mafia boss to put in her hands. The new kitchen smelled of toasted sesame, simmering broth, and fresh ginger as Seo-jin unlocked its doors for the first time. Soft gold lights glowed across the stainless steel counters, while the polished floor reflected every movement beneath her shoes. She ran her palm across the thick wooden prep table Kang Tae-hyun had installed and stopped when she felt a small brass plate beneath her fingertips. Chef Seo-jin. No title. No restaurant name. Just her name. You really did it, she whispered. Tae-hyun stood behind her in his dark suit, one hand resting against the doorframe. You said you wanted room to cook. Seo-jin turned. I said I didn't need saving. I remember. He stepped inside. That's why this isn't charity. He placed a set of keys on the counter. Their metal edges clicked against the steel. It's yours to run. Seo-jin picked them up, then looked around again. Everything was practical, expensive, and strangely personal. The heavy stockpots were the size she preferred, the knife handles fit her hands, and the stove had been positioned exactly where she had once complained the heat became unbearable. She looked at him. How did you know? I watched you work. 3 words. Nothing more. She turned away before. He could see the small smile that reached the corner of her mouth. By noon, the kitchen was alive. Oil crackled in a pan. Steam clouded the windows. Seo-jin moved between burners with quick, confident steps, tasting broth, adjusting seasoning, and calling instructions across the room. Tae-hyun remained near the doorway, silent, watching her transform the empty space into something warm. Then Seo-jin placed a bowl in front of him. Try it. He looked down. Again, this one is different. He tasted it. The warmth hit first, followed by garlic, sesame, and a faint sweetness. Tae-hyun's chopsticks stopped above the bowl. Where did you learn this? I told you. My mother. He looked at her. Did she make this exact dish? Seo-jin nodded. Every Sunday. She sat across from him, resting her hands around a cup of hot tea. She used to say food could make a person remember who they were before the world told them otherwise. Tae-hyun stared into the bowl. The restaurant noise seemed to fade behind the closed kitchen doors. He took another bite. This time, he did not speak. Seo-jin did not push him. She simply returned to the stove. Minutes later, Tae-hyun walked over and rolled up his sleeves. Seo-jin turned sharply. What are you doing? Helping. You're short-staffed. You own half the people who work in this building. That's not the same as knowing how to chop onions. She handed him one. Then prove you can follow instructions. Tae-hyun picked up the knife. Under the warm lights, the feared mafia boss of Seoul stood beside the plump chef who refused to be intimidated by him, awkwardly slicing onions while she corrected his grip.
Too thick, she said.
I notice. You're holding it wrong. He looked at her hand guiding his wrist, then at her face. Neither moved for a second. The kitchen clock ticked above them. Oil hissed softly on the stove. Seo-jin released his wrist and stepped back. Again.
Tae-hyun obeyed.
For the first time, the man known for making entire rooms fall silent was taking orders from a chef in an apron. And when Seo-jin finally laughed at his uneven slices, Tae-hyun did something no one in his world had seen him do in years. He laughed with her. At midnight, Seo-jin found Kang Tae-hyun standing alone at her kitchen stove, sleeves rolled up, trying to recreate her mother's soup without asking her for the recipe. The blue flame hissed beneath the pot, filling the quiet kitchen with the sharp scent of garlic and green onions, while the cold stainless steel counters reflected the dim overhead lights. Seo-jin stopped in the doorway, still holding her keys. What are you doing? Tae-hyun glanced over his shoulder. Cooking. You don't cook. I do now. She walked closer and looked into the pot. The broth was too dark. The onions were cut unevenly. One carrot floated near the surface like it had surrendered. Seo-jin folded her arms. That is not my soup. Tae-hyun picked up the spoon and tasted it. His face remained perfectly still. I know. Then why are you making it? He set the spoon down. Because you made something for me. Seo-jin looked at him for a moment, then took the spoon from his hand. Move. He stepped aside. She added water, lowered the heat, and reached for ginger. The kitchen filled with a warm, spicy fragrance. Tae-hyun watched every movement. You said your mother made this every Sunday. She did. And you still make it? Sometimes. Seo-jin stirred slowly. When I miss her. Tae-hyun said nothing. Instead, he picked up the cutting board and began slicing the scallions again, this time copying the exact thickness she had shown him. Seo-jin glanced at his hands. Better. High praise. She smiled despite herself. Don't get used to it. They worked side by side without music, without staff, without the usual distance between a chef and the man who owned the building. The clock above the doorway clicked toward 1 a.m. When the soup was ready, Seo-jin poured 2 bowls. The steam rose between them, carrying garlic, sesame, and ginger into the quiet room. Tae-hyun tasted it. This time, he closed his eyes for only a second. It tastes different, he said, because you stopped trying to make it perfect. He opened his eyes. What if I don't know how? Seo-jin set down her spoon. Then learn. The answer landed harder than any lecture could have.
Tae-hyun
Looked at her across the wooden table. Would you teach me? Seo-jin laughed softly. You're the first mafia boss I've met who asks permission to learn how to cook. I'm the only one you need to know. The words were quiet, almost playful, but they left a new silence behind them. Seo-jin reached for another bowl. Then start with breakfast tomorrow. Tae-hyun raised an eyebrow. What time? 5:30. He looked at the clock. That's in 4 hours. Exactly. She slid the bowl toward him. If you're serious about learning, show up. Tae-hyun stood, picked up his coat, and placed his hand on the back of her chair. I'll be here. Seo-jin watched him leave. Then she looked down at the soup between them and noticed something she had not expected. For the first time, Tae-hyun had not asked her to cook for him. He had asked her to teach him. And at 5:30 the next morning, the coldest man in Seoul would have to decide whether he was willing to follow her rules. The dinner had barely begun when a woman in a silver dress laughed at Han Seo-jin's apron and asked whether the kitchen had started serving desserts with dinner. Crystal glasses chimed beneath the warm pendant lights, and the private dining room smelled of grilled beef, black pepper, and expensive perfume. Seo-jin stood beside the table with a serving tray balanced against her palm, her white apron clean despite the long evening. Across from her, Kang Tae-hyun sat beneath the amber light, his black suit perfectly pressed, his chopsticks resting untouched beside his plate. The woman leaned back in her chair and looked Seo-jin up and down. You're the chef? She asked. Seo-jin nodded. Yes. Really? A soft laugh escaped the woman. I expected someone more refined. The room became quieter. Seo-jin set the tray down. What would you like instead? Someone who looks like they belong in a restaurant this expensive. Her fingers tapped the crystal stem of her glass.
No offense.
Seo-jin glanced at Tae-hyun. He did not move. His eyes remained on her unreadable. She turned back to the woman. None taken. Then she reached for the plate in front of her and lifted it away. But you're not getting another
dish.
The woman blinked. Excuse me? You insulted the chef and asked for a different one. I'm the chef. Seo-jin placed the plate on the service cart. So dinner is over for you. A chair scraped sharply against the floor. The woman stood. Do you know who I am? Seo-jin wiped her hands on a folded towel. No, you should. Maybe. She looked directly at her. But knowing your name won't make you hungrier.
Tae-hyun skatselisted.
The corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. The woman turned toward him. Are you going to let your employee speak to me like this? Tae-hyun remained seated. He reached for his water glass, took a slow drink, and set it down. She owns the kitchen. The woman stared at him. You gave her that much authority? I gave her the room.
His voice was calm.
She earned the rest. Seo-jin looked at him for a second, then returned her attention to the woman. If you want to stay, apologize to the kitchen staff. If you want to leave, the door is behind you. The woman's face tightened. You're making a mistake. Seo-jin stepped closer, not aggressively, simply refusing to retreat.
No.
I'm making dinner. You're the one making a scene. Silence settled across the room. Tae-hyun watched her, without intervening. This time, he was not protecting her. He was giving her the space to protect herself. The woman finally picked up her purse and walked toward the door, her heels striking sharply against the marble floor. Before leaving, she turned. You think his protection makes you important? Seo-jin shook her head. No. She looked toward Tae-hyun, then back at the woman. I think I'm important because I know what I'm worth.
The door closed.
Tae-hyun remained seated for several seconds. Then he stood, walked to Seo-jin, and placed his dinner napkin neatly beside the empty plate. From tomorrow, he said, no one enters this kitchen unless you approve it. Seo-jin raised an eyebrow. That sounds like protection. No, his eyes stayed on hers. It's respect. Then he walked away, leaving Seo-jin alone beneath the warm kitchen lights, realizing that the man who once controlled every room had just handed her the power to control his. The kitchen door slammed open just before dinner service, and Han Seo-jin caught Kang Tae-hyun as he staggered against the counter, one hand gripping the edge of her wooden prep table. The sharp smell of burnt garlic hung in the air, mixing with steam from a pot that had been left simmering too long, while the stainless steel floor felt cold beneath Seo-jin's shoes.
Oh.
She rushed toward him. He lifted one hand. Don't. His voice was low, strained. A dark stain marked the sleeve of his shirt, but he remained upright. Seo-jin ignored the warning and pulled a chair toward him. Sit down.
I've fine.
You're leaning on my counter. I said I'm fine. She grabbed a clean towel and pressed it against a sleeve. And I said sit. For once, the man who could silence an entire room obeyed. Seo-jin crouched beside him, checking his arm while the kitchen continued around them with the hiss of burners and the clatter of pans. What happened? Tae-hyun looked toward the closed kitchen doors. Someone wanted me distracted. Because of you? Because of everyone around me. Seo-jin stood. Then leave. His eyes snapped toward her.
What?
Leave the restaurant. If trouble follows you here, take it somewhere else. Tae-hyun rose from the chair. You think I can walk away? I think you can choose where you stand. She pointed toward the back entrance. And right now you're standing in my kitchen. A long silence followed. Then Tae-hyun reached for his coat. Seo-jin turned back toward the stove, convinced he would leave. Instead, he removed the coat, folded it over the chair, and rolled up his sleeves. What are you doing? Staying. That's not what I told you to do. I know. He stepped beside her. You asked me to leave. I'm choosing not to. Seo-jin stared at him. You're impossible. You've said that before. Because it's true. A sudden crash sounded from the dining room. Both turned. The kitchen lights flickered once. Tae-hyun immediately moved between Seo-jin and the doorway, but she caught his sleeve. No, he looked down at her hand. Stay behind me. This is my restaurant. She stepped beside him instead. Then we face it. Together. The doors opened, revealing overturned chairs and scattered dishes, but no one inside. Seo-jin walked to the service counter and began shutting off the burners one by one.
Click, click, click.
What are you doing? He asked. Closing.
Now.
Yes. She picked up the heavy kitchen keys. If my staff is in danger, nobody cooks tonight. Tae-hyun watched her lock the kitchen doors, one after another. The final lock clicked into place. You're not afraid? He asked. Seo-jin looked at him. I'm scared enough to make a smart decision. Something in his expression changed. He reached for her keys, but stopped before taking them. Then make one more.
What?
Come with me. Seo-jin held his gaze. Where? Tae-hyun opened the private exit. Beyond it, the hallway lights glowed cold against the polished stone. Somewhere I can keep you safe. Seo-jin stepped forward, but not behind him. She walked beside him. And for the first time, Tae-hyun was no longer protecting a chef who had entered his world. He was asking the woman who had changed him to step deeper into it. The private elevator carried Han Seo-jin and Kang Tae-hyun beneath the restaurant, its brushed steel walls humming softly as cold white lights slid across their faces. Seo-jin still held the kitchen keys in one hand, while Tae-hyun's discarded coat hung over his arm. You said somewhere safe, she said. Where are we going? My house. She looked at him. That sounds less safe than my kitchen. For the first time that night, Tae-hyun almost smiled. You're impossible. You taught me. The elevator doors opened into a quiet underground garage. Black cars waited beneath fluorescent lights, their polished surfaces reflecting long strips of silver. Tae-hyun walked beside her, not ahead, and when they reached the car, he opened the passenger door himself. Seo-jin stopped. You're driving? Tonight, yes. The mafia boss driving his own chef home. You're not my chef tonight. She raised an eyebrow. Then what am I? Tae-hyun looked at her for a long second. The person I'm responsible for. She stepped into the car. That sounds dangerously close to protecting me again. Maybe. The engine started with a low vibration, and the garage lights slipped across the windshield as they drove into the night. At his home, the silence was almost startling. The entrance was lined with dark wood and pale stone, but unlike the restaurant, there were no voices, no music, no staff moving through the halls. Seo-jin followed him into a kitchen larger than the one she had started with, its marble island cold beneath her fingertips and its appliances gleaming beneath recessed lights. You have a kitchen you never use, she said. I use it. For what? Coffee. She laughed softly. Tae-hyun opened a cabinet. Inside were rows of untouched dishes, expensive knives, and unopened ingredients. Seo-jin reached for a pan. Move. Why? Because you're hungry.
I've seen it.
She turned on the stove. You always say that. The blue flame appeared beneath the pan. Soon the room filled with the smell of garlic, butter, and scallions. Tae-hyun stood across the island watching her. Why do you keep doing that? He asked. Doing what? Taking care of me. Seo-jin stirred the pan. Because you keep forgetting to take care of yourself. His gaze dropped to the wooden spoon in her hand. Nobody has ever said that to me. Then somebody should have. She placed a plate in front of him.
Eat.
He sat. She remained standing until he took the first bite. He looked at the food, then at her. Seo-jin. She stopped. What? I could have asked you to stay, because you work for me. He pushed the plate aside. I could have ordered you to stay because I'm Kang Tae-hyun. He stood and faced her. But I don't want you here, because you have to be. The kitchen fell quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I want you here, because when you walk into a room, I remember there's a life outside my world. Seo-jin's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. Tae-hyun took one step closer, then stopped, leaving space between them. And I don't want to lose that. She looked at him for several seconds before quietly saying, Then stop living like you already lost it. Tae-hyun lowered his eyes. When he looked back, something had changed. All right. He picked up his phone, made one call, and spoke in a voice colder than the marble beneath his hand. I'm done with the people who keep bringing this life to my door. He ended the call. Seo-jin stared at him. What did you just do? Tae-hyun looked at her.
Issues.
And for the first time, the frozen heart she had been warming was no longer merely opening. It was changing the life around it. By dawn, Han Seo-jin found Kang Tae-hyun waiting outside her kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and the keys to a new life in his hand. The hallway smelled of roasted beans and warm bread, while pale gold light spilled across the polished floor. He had changed out of his black suit and wore a simple charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed to his forearms. Seo-jin stopped beside him. You're early. 5:20. You remembered. I remember everything you tell me. He handed her a cup. She took it, warming both hands around the paper sleeve. What happened last night? Tae-hyun looked toward the kitchen door. I ended the part of my business that kept bringing danger to people who had nothing to do with it. And I'm keeping only the legitimate restaurants and businesses. Seo-jin studied his face. You actually did it? Yes.
No speech. No dramatic promise.
Just one decision already made. He placed a folder on the counter. Inside were documents transferring ownership of the new restaurant entirely to her. Seo-jin stared at the signature page. Tae-hyun, you built the kitchen. You built the menu. You built the place. He pushed the folder toward her. It should have your name on it. She closed the folder. And what do you want? He looked at her for a long moment. You. The kitchen seemed to become quieter. The refrigerator hummed behind them. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck rolled over wet pavement. Tae-hyun continued, his voice steady. Not because I own anything. Not because you work for me. Not because I can protect you. He stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. I want you beside me because you are the first person who ever made me want to become someone worthy of standing beside you. Seo-jin lowered her eyes to the folder. Then she smiled. You know, for a mafia boss, you're finally learning how to ask instead of order. I'm trying. She opened the folder again and signed her name. Then I'll try too. Tae-hyun watched the pen move across the page. What does that mean? She looked up. It means I'll stay. His shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. As my chef. As myself. She stepped around the counter and placed her hand over his. And you can keep learning how to cook. A quiet laugh escaped him. I was afraid you'd say that. You still cut onions too thick. I own 3 restaurants. And you still cut onions too thick. He smiled. This time, there was no guarded expression behind it. Months later, the new restaurant opened beneath warm amber lights, its wooden tables carrying the scent of fresh bread, garlic, and sesame. Seo-jin ran the kitchen under her own name. Tae-hyun sat at the corner table, no bodyguards, no cold entourage, waiting for the first bowl she had prepared that morning. She placed it before him herself. He took one bite and looked up. Still the best. You say that every time, because it's true every time. Seo-jin sat across from him, and sunlight moved softly across the table between them. The man who once lived behind locked doors had learned to leave them open, and the woman who had entered his life with nothing but a bowl of soup had given him something money and power never could, a reason to become warm again.